I brought my last three books that came in these last few years, which are in some way relevant to this. One of them is called The Arab Spring, From the Arab Spring to Islamic Winter. It was published 2 years ago, and that's about what started as Arab Spring and ended up, as you know. This was published 8 years ago, and as if it were published today, right. Because the topic is about the spread of Islamikaze. Islamikaze is a word that I coined about what is called by mistake suicide bombers. There is no suicide in Islam, and therefore it's simply mistaken to call them suicide bombers. So I call them Islamikaze. It's like Islam and kamikaze. Some people who die because of ideological reasons, not because they want to commit suicide. If they want to commit suicide, they can do it at home. They don't need to go to look for an adventure. And terrorism in Europe. When I published at the time, I said, "Are you crazy? In Europe, you think?" He said, "Wait, you will see." Now it came, unfortunately. And the other one is that it's called Hatred, Lies and Violence. Because you see, what happens is that they blame Israel for everything that happens in the world. And usually when you tell a story, you want to justify it. You want to provide proofs for it, right? Otherwise people might not believe you. And if you don't have facts, you invent them. Those are the lies. And that's the reason why when you see all this propaganda around us, it's not only facts, because with facts you can't argue, but you can invent facts and repeat them according to the Nazi propaganda. Goebbels at the time, he said if you repeat a lie enough times, it becomes the truth. So I took 3 cases from the world of Islam. One, the Palestinians for all the Arab world, Turkey for the Sunnite world, and Iran for the Shiite world. And each one of them has a special way of inventing their own lies and repeating them. And that's what I wanted in a scholarly way to provide that for the general readers. Everybody speaks about ISIS, what is happening in Iraq and all that, and that is, of course, one of the most serious manifestations of that problem all over the world. There is another one which is becoming more and more serious, which is the Boko Haram in Africa. And they are similar in many ways. So rather than studying each one of them separately, I took some 10 or 12 movements like that all over the Islamic world, and I'm trying to present them to see the differences between them and so on. And they have several traits of character which are identical to all of them. One of them is that every one of them speaks about returning to the period of the Prophet, the Prophet Muhammad, because that is considered to be the ideal prophet, the ideal times in history, in the history of humanity. Because the Prophet Muhammad, according to their belief, was the most perfect of people, of man, and therefore what he did in his lifetime must have been the best, including the regime, the social life and everything that he introduced must be the best. If it is the best, then of course you cannot make exactly the same like him, because only he is perfect, nobody else is perfect. But you can make it as close as possible to the times of the Prophet. And that's the reason why you see all these movements, from Boko Haram in West Africa to the Taliban in Africa, in Afghanistan. They all speak about taking the Prophet Muhammad as the model. And of course, because of the history, we know what he did and so on, and all we try to do is to be as close as possible like him. Like him, nobody can be, but as close as possible to what he was, we can do. And then you see Boko Haram, Taliban, ISIS, and all the other movements are trying exactly to be the same thing. The second quality that they share in public is Muslim unity, because they say what brought to Islam its great achievements back in the Middle Ages was the fact that we were united. We had one Islamic world. And then Europe trembled and was afraid from us. Not the other way around like it is today, the West is stronger. They said then it was Islam which was stronger, it was Europe who trembled from fear from us. And therefore, what we have to do is to bring all the Muslims together in order to create this Muslim unity. The third quality that you want to bring into itself is the caliphate. You all hear the ISIS and the Boko Haram and others, they all want to establish Muslim caliphate. Hamas, by the way, that's one of the principles in their program. And caliphate, of course, is again copying something that had existed back in the 7th, 8th century when it started, until the end of the Ottoman Empire, when after World War I, the Ottoman Empire disappeared. So they said all that period of time, there was a Muslim caliphate. That is, there was a ruler, the caliph, who is a replacement of the Prophet Muhammad, because what is caliph? Caliph, like what in the Christian church they call the vicar, you know, the person, like the Pope replaces the presence of Jesus Christ on earth. And that's exactly the meaning of the word caliph. Caliph, like the vicar in Christianity. And therefore, for the Muslims, it is impossible to conceive of a Christian existence without a caliph, because in order to represent the authority of the Prophet Muhammad at the time, you must have one ruler for all Muslims. Now, in those days, in the beginning, when it started, the Muslim community was concentrated in one area. But now it's spread all over the world. And therefore it becomes more and more difficult to have one caliphate. And that's also the reason why there are so many movements. Because all of them want a caliphate, but all of them want a caliphate headed by them. They are the real thing. And that's the reason why they cannot come to unity, the second principle I told you, and they cannot have one caliph. And they continue to have struggles among themselves. But the idea remains as it is, to have that kind of one rule of Islam. If it is not practical, at least it is a part of the dream, a part of the ideal, and they want to carry that out as much as possible in practice. Now, all these movements are many, I mean, radical movements, and they are of many kinds. You cannot lump them together into one kind, because they are different. And we have just to understand a little bit the differences between them, because we will not go into the study. In about 1 year, the book will come out, that you can read for yourself, and you can see all the categories and so on. So first of all, there are states that are already radical states. And the two that you can count today are Iran, which is led by a radical government, and Sudan, which was really groomed by Iran itself, and they learned that doctrine, and they are more or less carrying it out today. But apart from those two states, all the other radical movements in Islam, which are declaring their radicalism, they are, as a matter of fact, a state in the making, because it's not a state recognized by the world. Take, for example, Hamas. Hamas, which is all in our area of the world, they took the Gaza Strip, they turned it into a state in practice, but nobody in the world recognizes it. It's not a recognized state. And that's the reason why I call it a state in the making. Another one that was and is no more is the Taliban. The Taliban took over power in September 1st, 1996 in Afghanistan when they took over the rule in Kabul, and they ruled for about 6 years until until the Americans invaded after September 11 in December 2001 and took over the place. But until then it existed as a Taliban state, recognized perhaps by one country in the world and so on. But so it was a state in the making which disappeared. Hamas today is what is that, and we don't know how long it will last. And as a matter of fact, in that kind of category, you can include also the ISIS. ISIS also, they did not create a new state. They took two halves of two existing countries, Iraq and Syria, which are in chaos because of their internal situation, and they declared their own state. But again, nobody recognizes it. It's not a state separate from Syria or Iraq. Therefore, it's a state in the making. How long it will take? Nobody knows. Nobody knows it will go that way. By the way, in Nigeria also, northeast, that's where the Boko Haram started this struggle. They created a part of northeastern Nigeria, which is the Boko Haram area. They even call it a caliphate. Exactly the same pattern. Because I said they are trying to follow exactly the same idea, and they call it the Boko Haram area. They declare a caliphate. The head of the movement is the caliph, exactly like the people of Syria and Iraq are doing today. They took a part of the country. They call it ISIS or IIS, the Islamic State, and they think that this will be a focus around which a new caliphate, new Islamic empire will be built. Again, how long will it take? How long will it hold together is unknown. Nobody knows. It will take what it will take. There is also a very interesting example in Mali. Mali, a country that is in the next proximity to Nigeria, where the Boko Haram happened, and they established a state of their own, Azawad it is called, and in the meantime, France sent some troops, and they intervened, and they interrupted the existence of that state. But exactly as nobody had stated the founding of new state, nobody also had announced the dying of that state. These states come, rise, and are declined, but they are not recognized in the world today. So that kind of movement you have all over the Middle East, and I gave you a few examples, but there are, of course, many more. To distinguish with all that, you have another category of radical movements which are a rebellious movement. They don't declare a state, they don't declare a caliphate, they just say that they are a Muslim population which does not want to remain subjugated by the central government, and they want to secede, to establish some kind of independent movement of their own. And a case like that you have in China today. Some of you may have heard of a Uyghur problem. There is a big Muslim minority, some 15 million people, in that area of China, northwest China, and they are fighting for their independence. They call themselves the East Turkestan liberation movement, and they also want to secede from China to establish their own state. And again, but then there is no caliph, there is no declaration of radical movement and so on. So all this just to tell you very briefly that there are many models. When you say radical Islam, then you have to ask what kind of radical Islam, what is it, what are the intentions, what they want to establish. Because, for example, when you look at the Hamas charter, the Hamas charter was promulgated first time in February 1988, when the first Intifada started here in the Gaza Strip, and then the Hamas was founded then, and then they wrote a charter, and a student of mine, an Arab, brought it to me, and so I translated it and put it on the internet in English, and it's still there. So if you want to have the exact translation of the Hamas thing, it's still there, and so on. So when you examine that, you'll see one of the chapters there is that we are part of the Muslim Brothers, and the Muslim Brothers, want to establish a world caliphate again, the magic word. They want to establish caliphate. So you see, there can be many possibilities. And finally, just to give you this very brief thing before you can ask your questions, you have also to take into consideration groups that derive from Al-Qaeda. Qaeda, we all heard, we all know. And Qaeda literally means a base in Arabic. Why? Because Bin Laden, when he built Al-Qaeda, first in Saudi Arabia and then in Sudan when he had to run away, and then he ran away from Sudan and he found refuge in Afghanistan. And when he was destroyed by the Americans, the Qaeda spread or divided into a lot of sub-chapters because they cannot maintain a concentrated, focused movement anymore. Because America was after it, bombing it, persecuting it wherever it was and so on. And therefore now you have regional groupings of Al-Qaeda. You have one in North Africa, for example, which takes care of North Africa of the Sahara period, and it is also connected with the two movements I just told you in Black Africa, in Mali and in Nigeria. So you see this great extension of the Qaeda does not exist anymore. I mean, there is a leader, he is there in Pakistan somewhere, but it does not exist as a movement which existed in the time of September 11 when they did those big things and so on. So it's there, it takes care of the entire area. There is another group which takes care of the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Yemen, and the problems that are caused today in Yemen are caused by Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula. There is another base in East Africa. East Africa, you have those people who blew up the American embassies in Tanzania back in 1998. So it operated from there. They also attacked a few Israeli interests in East Africa. It's all them. And this famous or infamous organization of the Shabiba in Somalia. Somalia also is fallen apart, is divided up in between various groups and so on. So that's Al-Qaeda in East Africa. It has responsibility for the entire area. And then you have Europe. In Europe you have sleeping cells of some 30 groups of Al-Qaeda in literally every country, including Sweden. There is a chapter of Al-Qaeda, but it is dormant because they realize that if they manifest themselves, they will be crushed right away. And they are very afraid, so therefore they don't do that. And there is another chapter of Al-Qaeda in the Far East. You find them in Manila, Philippines, some in Taiwan, some in Korea, and so on. They are all connected. And from time to time you hear that something exploded here or there and so on. So this is generally the structure of this radical movement. They are interconnected because they pass information to each other, but they also fight each other. Sometimes there is jealousy about their authorities, about their capacities to do or not to do things, and therefore very often you find in Yemen and even in Syria, for example, you have a group, Jabhat Nusra, which is a chapter of Al-Qaeda in Syria, which sometimes is fighting with this Islamic State, the Daesh or ISIS that we call. And not that their ideologies are different, they are not. But it's a personality clashes because there are different people who lead this or that, and they don't want to give much glory to the other, to the rival and so on. And they keep fighting each other. And therefore, to sum up very briefly, before we can open it, if you like, to talk more about the thing, I should say that although it is a new phenomenon that we have instead of states, because today, the whole modern world, until the end of the 20th century, the world was organized in nation states. And every person identified himself, I am a Swede, I am an Iraqi, I am this. That means today you identify yourself as belonging to a certain national group. And you identify yourself by that. Now, especially in the Middle East, but I think it will happen more and more in other places around the world, the national boundaries are breaking up. And therefore you see these groups like Boko Haram in Nigeria. They couldn't care less about Nigeria. They take part of the territory and they call it the Boko Haram territory, or the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. They don't recognize the Palestinian Authority, which signed the treaty with Israel and so on. They simply take a piece of territory. They rule by the laws of Islam. In all these places, this is the law.
It's Purim.
Ah.
Purim in 1 month, so it's already starting.
Oh, yeah.
They
are rehearsing.
They're rehearsing just kids.
All right.
Firecrackers. Yeah.
Firecrackers. Okay. So
You don't have to take cover.
I think the biggest change that we are facing today around the world is the breaking up of nations and their merging into new entities. Those new entities are over or beyond the national boundaries because they are multinational, transnational. Like you see, Syria and Iraq, two halves of each coming together into a new entity which never existed before. So they call it the Islamic State. There is no other name to it. So I think this is the phenomenon that we have to watch in the months and the coming years. And much of what will happen in the Middle East and in the world will depend on the capacity and the will and the advisability, because I'm not sure it's a good thing to fight against these movements in order to return to the borders that are recognized by the world. For example, America and some Arab countries and the European countries are fighting together. They said it will be a long fight, but until we exterminate, I'm quoting them, these radical movements. So whether they can exterminate them, whether it's good to exterminate them, what we will create, and so on, these are open questions nobody has any answer to for the time being. And therefore I think we are in for a very uncertain future, and let's wait and watch what will happen.